Section 1. The numbers that don't add up. Marcus Bennett had built his business one bad day at a time. 14 years. 31 locations. More sleepless nights than he could count. He knew what a struggling store looked like. He knew what a thriving one looked like too. But he had never, not once in 14 years, seen a store that looked like store number 118. It was a Thursday morning when his finance director, Priya, slid a printed report across the conference table and said 4 words that planted the first seed of unease. This one doesn't make sense. Marcus picked up the report. Store number 118. Drive-through only location on Carmichael Road. 41 employees. Standard menu. Standard pricing. And yet, for the third consecutive quarter, it had posted profit margins 11% above every comparable location in the entire regional network. 11%. He leaned back and read the number again. In the restaurant business, a 2% margin difference between locations was normal. 3% raised eyebrows. 5% triggered a full review. 11% was either a miracle or a lie, and Marcus had stopped believing in miracles around the time his third location nearly bankrupted him. Is there an explanation? He asked. Priya opened her laptop. That's what I can't figure out. Food costs are normal. Labor is normal. Overhead is normal. But the revenue per transaction is consistently higher than any other drive-through we operate. Not by a huge amount per order, but across thousands of transactions, it adds up to something significant. Higher revenue per transaction could mean upselling, Marcus said. It could, Priya said carefully. Except the customer satisfaction scores for that location have dropped 8 points in the last 2 quarters. Happy customers who are buying more don't leave worse reviews. That sentence sat in the room like smoke. Customers paying more. Customers less satisfied. And somehow the store was quietly cleaning up while every comparable location ran at normal margins. Marcus tapped his finger against the report. Something about that combination, higher charges, lower satisfaction, stronger profits, formed a shape in his mind he couldn't name yet. But he recognized it the way you recognize a storm before it arrives. Not by seeing it. By the way the air changes around you. I want to go in, he said. Priya looked up. Audit team? I can have 2 people there by Monday. No, Marcus shook his head. Auditors walk in with clipboards and everyone straightens up. Whatever is happening there, I want to see it the way a regular employee would. From the inside. A pause. You want to go undercover, Priya said. I want to go undercover, he confirmed. Store number 118 sat on a busy 4-lane road between a gas station and a tire shop. Clean location. Well lit. The drive-through lane wrapped around the left side of the building, and even at 7:45 on a Monday morning the line stretched back to the street. Marcus had arranged his cover through a staffing agency the company occasionally used for temporary hires. He arrived as Mark Benson, close enough to his real name that he wouldn't hesitate if someone called it across a noisy kitchen. Standard uniform. Cheap prepaid phone. His actual car, a black Audi, was parked 6 blocks away. He had walked the rest. The shift supervisor who met him at the back door was a heavy-set man in his late 30s named Derek. He had a laminated name tag, a coffee in one hand, and the particular expression of someone who had trained too many new hires and enjoyed it less each time. You the temp? Derek asked. Yes, sir, Marcus said. Drive-through window. You take payment, hand out orders, say thank you. Don't touch the register settings. Don't offer substitutions. If a customer complains, get me. Derek handed him a headset. Questions? None, Marcus said. He was at the window by 8 o'clock. The first hour was completely ordinary. Cars pulled forward. Marcus took cash, swiped cards, handed over paper bags and drink carriers. He said thank you approximately 60 times. The morning rush moved fast and left no room for anything except keeping up. But in the second hour, something small snagged his attention. A woman in a silver hatchback handed over her loyalty card and said cheerfully, "The medium combo should be free. I finally hit my rewards points." Marcus scanned the card and glanced at the screen. The system registered the redemption. Then he looked at the transaction total. It hadn't changed. He hesitated for only a second before Derek appeared beside him, leaned over, and tapped 3 keys on the register with a practiced ease that suggested he had done it 1,000 times. System glitch, Derek said quietly, to no one in particular. Happens with the rewards sometimes. Balances out on the back end. The woman drove away with her free combo that she had, By every indication, still fully paid for. Marcus handed over the next order and said nothing, but his pulse was running faster. By the time his shift ended at 2, he had watched it happen 3 more times. Small amounts, different customers, same pattern. Loyalty rewards registered as redeemed, customers still charged full price. The difference was small enough that most people never noticed. The ones who did were quickly reassured. Software issue. Sync delay. Nothing to worry about. Marcus walked back to his car in the afternoon heat and sat behind the wheel for a long time without starting the engine. He had come looking for an explanation. He had found the beginning of one. And the feeling it gave him wasn't satisfaction. It was dread. Because whatever was happening inside store number 118 was organized, practiced, and completely invisible to anyone not standing right at that window watching it happen in real time. The question was no longer whether something was wrong. The question was how deep it went, and who else knew. Next, Marcus digs into hundreds of transactions, and one name keeps coming up, an employee everyone respects, but no one will talk about. Section 2, Strange Patterns Behind the Window. Marcus didn't sleep well that night. He lay in the dark running numbers in his head. For incidents in a single 6-hour shift. Small amounts, $3 here, $4.50 there. Nothing that would make a customer pull over and call corporate. Nothing that would show up as a red flag in a standard audit because the system was recording the redemptions correctly. On paper, every loyalty reward was being processed. In reality, the customers were still paying. It was clean, almost elegant, in a way that made his stomach turn. By day 3, he had settled into the rhythm of the store well enough that people had mostly stopped noticing him. That was exactly what he needed. Invisibility was the only tool he had brought with him, and he was using it carefully. During slow periods between rushes, he started paying close attention to the register screen whenever a loyalty transaction came through. He wasn't touching anything, just watching, just memorizing. The pattern was consistent enough to be deliberate. Not every loyalty redemption was intercepted. Maybe 1 in 4, sometimes 1 in 5. Spread out enough that no single shift looked unusual. Spread out enough that a customer who came back the following week might have a perfectly normal experience and never connect it to the time before. Whoever designed this had thought about it. They had built in just enough irregularity to keep it from looking like a system. On the afternoon of day 3, during a lull between the lunch rush and the school pickup wave, Marcus found a quiet corner near the break room and did something he had been waiting to do carefully. He pulled out his prepaid phone and started going through numbers. He had been mentally logging transaction times throughout his shifts. Now he cross-referenced them against the store's publicly visible review data, timestamps on customer complaints going back 18 months. It took 40 minutes, and it wasn't perfect, but a shape began to emerge. The complaints about loyalty charges weren't random. They clustered around specific shifts, specific days of the week, specific time windows, and those windows lined up almost exactly with Derek's schedule. Marcus put the phone in his pocket and went back to the floor. He was careful not to change his behavior at all. Same pace, same tone, same new higher energy of someone still figuring out where the extra napkins were kept. But his mind was moving fast now, sorting and filing everything he observed into 2 categories, things that confirmed what he suspected and things that didn't fit yet. It was the second category that led him to Hannah. He had noticed her on his first day without thinking much about it. She worked the order station inside, managing the digital queue and coordinating with the kitchen during busy periods. She was good at her job in the way that people are good at something they have done long enough that they stop thinking about it. Efficient, calm, well-liked by everyone, including the younger staff who clearly looked up to her. But whenever a loyalty-related issue came up near her, a customer complaint passed back through the headset, a question from a newer employee about reward redemptions, something shifted in her face. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like the expression of someone who already knows how a story ends and is bracing for it. Marcus watched it happen twice before he was sure he wasn't imagining it. On the afternoon of day 3, a young employee named Cody asked Hannah a simple question while Marcus was refilling cup lids nearby. "Hey, a customer's saying their reward didn't apply, but the system shows it did. What do I tell them?" There was a half-second pause before Hannah answered. "Tell them it'll be corrected on the back end," she said. Her voice was steady. "Practiced." Cody nodded and walked away satisfied. Hannah went back to her screen. Marcus went back to the cup lids. But he had caught it. The pause before her answer. The particular steadiness in her voice that wasn't the steadiness of someone who didn't care. It was the steadiness of someone working very hard not to show that they did. She knew. The question was exactly how much. That evening, Marcus wrote everything down in a notes app on his prepaid phone. Not a formal report, just a record. Transaction patterns. Shift overlaps. Derek's register interventions. Hannah's reactions. The way certain employees seemed to go quiet when loyalty topics came up, not in a guilty way, but in a careful way, like people who had decided a long time ago not to ask certain questions. A picture was forming, and it was more organized than he had initially feared. This wasn't one person quietly skimming. There were at minimum two people who knew. Derek, who was executing it, and Hannah, who understood what was happening and had chosen not to stop it. What Marcus didn't know yet was why. Derek he could read easily enough. Some people found ways to take what they thought they deserved, and Derek had the look of a man who had convinced himself he deserved more than he was getting. But Hannah didn't fit that shape. Whatever her reason was, it wasn't simple. And something told Marcus, the same instinct that had built 31 locations from nothing, that when he finally found out why, the entire story was going to change. Next, Marcus visits 2 other stores and hears something about Hannah's past that reframes everything. Section 3, Following the Trail. Marcus needed distance to think clearly. Not emotional distance. He had plenty of that. He had spent 14 years making hard calls, and he knew how to separate feeling from function. What he needed was physical distance. A different store. A different crew. A perspective that hadn't been shaped by 3 days of watching Derek tap those 3 keys with the casual confidence of someone who had never once considered getting caught. He arranged 2 days of absence from store number 118 through the staffing agency, citing a family obligation. Then he drove 40 minutes north to store number 104. He didn't go undercover this time. At number 104, he was himself, Marcus Bennett, owner, doing an informal walkthrough. He kept it casual. No clipboard. No formal review language. He bought a coffee, chatted with the manager, a sharp woman named Renata who had run the location for 6 years, and spent 2 hours watching the drive-through operation from the inside. Everything looked exactly as it should. Loyalty redemptions processed cleanly. Customers drove away without confusion. The register screen moved through transactions the way it was designed to. Marcus ran 3 test redemptions using dummy loyalty accounts his team had set up for exactly this kind of quiet audit. All 3 applied correctly without any intervention from staff. No pattern, no clustering, no 3 keystroke correction from a hovering supervisor. Store number 104 was clean. He drove another 30 minutes east to store number 127 the following morning and repeated the process. Same result. Clean transactions. Normal margins. No anomalies worth noting. By the time Marcus got back in his car outside number 127, one thing was confirmed with certainty. Whatever was happening at store number 118 wasn't a company-wide problem. It wasn't a software flaw that affected all locations. It wasn't a regional payroll issue or a vendor irregularity. It was specific, contained, deliberate. Someone at number 118 had figured out a gap in the loyalty system and had been exploiting it carefully enough and for long enough that it had never surfaced in any audit. That level of precision didn't happen by accident. Marcus sat in the parking lot of store number 127 and called Renata back at number 104. He kept the conversation light, thanked her for her time, mentioned he was doing informal check-ins across locations, asked a few general questions about staff morale and turnover. Then, toward the end, he made the question sound like an afterthought. You ever cross paths with a woman named Hannah? Works over at number 118. I think she's been with the company a while. The pause on the other end was brief but noticeable. Hannah Flores? Renata said. I think so, yes. Sure, I know Hannah. Another small pause, the kind that means someone is deciding how much to say. She actually worked here for about 2 years before she transferred to number 118. One of the best employees I've ever had, honestly. Incredibly reliable. Never missed a shift, never cut corners. Customers loved her. Sounds like a strong record, Marcus said. It was. It really was. Renata's tone shifted slightly, not negative, but weighted. She went through something pretty hard about 8 or 9 months ago. Took a leave of absence. Came back different. Quieter. I heard through the regional grapevine she transferred to number 118 shortly after she returned. I always figured she just needed a fresh start somewhere. Different how? Marcus asked. Just smaller, I guess. Like something had taken the air out of her. Hannah used to be the person who organized the birthday collections for other staff, who stayed late without being asked, who trained the new hires with this genuine patience you can't fake. When she came back from leave, she was still doing her job perfectly, but the warmth was muted. Like a light with a dimmer on it, Renata paused again. I hope she's okay, honestly. I always liked her. Marcus thanked her and ended the call. He sat with that for a while. A leave of absence 8 or 9 months ago. Returns changed. Transfers to a new location. And at that new location, within what appeared to be a matter of months, a loyalty fraud scheme is running smoothly enough to inflate profits by 11% across 3 straight quarters. The timeline was not a coincidence. Something had happened to Hannah during that leave. Something significant enough to change her. And whatever it was had either pushed her into the scheme or made her unwilling to walk away from it once she knew. Marcus drove back toward Carmichael Road and let the pieces rearrange themselves in his mind. He had walked into this expecting to find greed. A dishonest manager skimming from a loyalty program. Maybe a small crew of employees pocketing the difference. A story he had seen variations of before, not often, but enough to recognize the shape. But Hannah didn't fit the story he knew. Renata had just described someone who stayed late without being asked and trained new hires with genuine patience. People like that didn't quietly become thieves because the opportunity presented itself. They needed a reason, a pressure, something that made a line they would never normally cross feel like the only option left. Marcus didn't know what that pressure was yet, but he was going to find out. And the feeling that was growing quietly in the back of his mind, beneath the investigator's focus, beneath the owner's controlled anger, was something he hadn't expected to feel at this stage. It felt uncomfortably close to worry. Next, Marcus follows Hannah after a closing shift, and what he sees changes the entire direction of the investigation. Section 4, The Late Night Discovery. Marcus was back at store number 118 by Thursday. He slipped back into the routine easily enough. Derek gave him a brief nod when he arrived, the kind of nod that meant you're still here, fine, get to work. The morning rush swallowed him whole, and for 6 hours he was just Mark Benson again, taking payments, handing out orders, saying thank you until the words lost their shape. But he was watching Hannah more carefully now. Not obviously. He had spent enough time on the floor that he knew how to observe without looking like he was observing. He kept his eyes moving, kept his hands busy, kept his expression neutral. But in his peripheral vision, Hannah was never far from his attention. She was good at her job. Renata had been right about that. Even now, even muted, there was a quiet competence to the way she moved through a shift that the younger staff unconsciously organized themselves around. When the kitchen fell behind during the lunch rush, it was Hannah who recalibrated the queue without making anyone feel blamed. When a headset malfunctioned and orders started crossing, it was Hannah who caught the error before a single wrong bag went out the window. She was holding things together, and she looked exhausted doing it. Not the regular exhaustion of a long shift. Something deeper. The kind that sleep doesn't fix because it isn't coming from the body. It was in the set of her jaw and the way her eyes went somewhere distant during the 30-second gaps between orders. Like a person carrying something heavy that she had been carrying for so long, she had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. Marcus clocked out at 2:30 and walked to his car. Then he waited. He had parked on a side street with a partial view of the staff exit. He knew Hannah's shift ran until 9. He wasn't planning on sitting there for 6.5 hours. He had work to do remotely, and the prepaid phone kept him connected to Priya through a secure messaging app. But he wanted to be there when Hannah left. Just to see. Just to follow the thread another step. At 9:17 the staff exit opened and Hannah came out. She wasn't walking like someone headed home. She was walking fast, head down, shoulders forward. She got into a 10-year-old Honda with a cracked rear bumper and pulled out of the lot before most of her co-workers had even reached their cars. Marcus followed at a distance. 2 traffic lights. A left turn. Another left. He expected a residential street, an apartment complex, a row of townhouses, somewhere that said end of the day, going home. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy. Marcus parked across the street and watched through the windshield. Hannah sat in her car for almost 3 minutes before going inside. Just sat there. Still. Marcus had the strange feeling she was doing the same thing he had done outside store number 127. Sitting with something, preparing herself for it. Then she got out and went in. He gave it 10 minutes. When she came back out, she was carrying a white paper bag, the kind pharmacies use for prescription medications. Not a small one. The kind that means multiple items, or expensive items, or both. She sat in her car again before driving away. This time Marcus could see her clearly under the pharmacy's overhead lights. She was looking at something inside the bag. Her head was bent. Her shoulders were very still. Then she put the bag on the passenger seat and drove. She didn't go home after that either. She drove 12 minutes to St. Augustine's Medical Center and parked in the short-stay lot near the main entrance. Marcus pulled in 2 rows behind her. He watched her take the pharmacy bag, lock the car, and walk through the automatic doors without hesitation. Not the walk of someone visiting. The walk of someone who knew exactly which floor, which corridor, which room. Marcus sat in the parking lot for a long time. A pharmacy run at 9:30 at night. Straight to a hospital after a full shift on her feet. Prescription bag that looked heavy enough to cost real money. None of it was the behavior of someone spending stolen funds on herself. None of it pointed toward the profile he had initially been building. Opportunistic, self-serving, quietly greedy. It pointed somewhere else entirely. He didn't follow her inside. That felt like a line he wasn't willing to cross without more information. But he stayed in the parking lot until 11, when Hannah came back out. She looked smaller somehow than she had going in. Not broken. She was holding herself together with the particular discipline of someone who had been holding themselves together for a very long time. But there was a moment, just before she reached her car, when she stopped walking and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Just for a second. Then she straightened, unlocked the car, and drove away. Marcus drove home slowly. He had come into this investigation with a clear picture of what he was looking for. A fraud. A scheme. Someone taking money that didn't belong to them. He had found all of that. But somewhere between the pharmacy parking lot and the glow of St. Augustine's entrance, the picture had cracked open. And what was spilling out of it didn't look anything like greed. Next, Marcus uncovers the full truth about Hannah, and nothing about this story is what he thought it was. Section 5. The secret behind the fraud. Marcus didn't go back to store number 118 the next morning. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and his laptop and started pulling threads. Not aggressively. Carefully. The way you handle something fragile that you're not sure you have the right to be touching. He had access to employee records through his HR system. He had used it hundreds of times for legitimate operational reasons, and he told himself this was no different. He searched Hannah Flores. The file came up clean. 6 years with the company, strong performance reviews every cycle, one period of approved medical leave beginning 11 months ago, lasting 6 weeks. Reason listed as family medical emergency. Family medical emergency. He sat with that phrase for a moment, then kept digging. The leave dates matched almost exactly with what Renata had described. Hannah had come back from that leave quieter, dimmed, carrying something invisible. And within 2 months of her return, the anomalies at store number 118 began appearing in the transaction data. Marcus pulled up the loyalty system's backend audit log, something only he and 2 members of his finance team had access to. He had requested a full export from Priya 2 days earlier under the guise of a routine system check, and she had sent it without question. He spent 3 hours going through it. What he found was methodical and precise in a way that made him set his coffee down and rub his face with both hands. The scheme had started small. 11 months ago, right around the time Hannah returned from leave, there were 3 irregular redemption transactions in a single week. Small amounts. The kind of thing that looked like a genuine system glitch if you weren't looking for a pattern. The following week, there were 5. The week after, 8. Over the following months, it grew gradually, never spiking sharply enough to trigger any automated alert, always staying just below the threshold that would have flagged it for review. Someone had studied the system's alert parameters. Someone who had enough access and enough time to understand exactly how much could be taken without being noticed. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Hannah had worked the order station for years. She understood the loyalty system better than almost anyone in the company. She would have known where the gaps were. She would have known what the audit triggers looked like and how to stay beneath them. But she hadn't been working the register. Derek had been the one at the window, making the physical interventions. Which meant at some point Hannah had brought Derek in, or Derek had figured it out and positioned himself to take part. Either way, they were operating together, and at least 2 other employees had seen enough to understand what was happening and had chosen silence. Marcus needed to understand why the silence. He made a careful phone call to a former HR manager who had handled the company's employee assistance program before moving on. He kept it vague, a general question about medical coverage gaps for employees with dependents facing serious illness. Within the framework of the conversation, he got what he needed. The company's insurance plan had a hard annual cap on specialist treatment coverage. Beyond that cap, everything was out of pocket. For a routine illness, that cap was more than enough. For something serious, something ongoing, something requiring repeated specialist visits and expensive medications over many months, it ran out fast. Marcus opened a new search. Pediatric specialist. St. Augustine's Medical Center. The hospital Hannah had walked into without hesitation at 9:30 on a weeknight. He wasn't able to access her son's medical records. He didn't try, but he found enough in the public-facing information about St. Augustine's pediatric unit, its specializations, its treatment programs, to understand what kind of cases it handled. Complex cases, long-term cases, children who needed consistent, expensive, ongoing care. He closed the laptop. The full shape of it was clear now, and it sat in his chest like something with weight. Hannah's son was sick. Seriously sick. The kind of sick that didn't resolve in 6 weeks and go away. The company insurance had covered what it could cover and then stopped. And Hannah, who had 6 years of strong performance reviews and a genuine loyalty to the company she had given her best years to, had looked at the gap between what insurance covered and what her son needed and made a decision that would have been unthinkable to her a year earlier. She had found a loophole. She had started small, a few dollars a week, barely noticeable, probably telling herself it was temporary. Just until she caught up. Just until the next insurance cycle. Just until something changed. But nothing changed. The bills kept coming. Noah kept needing treatment. And the few dollars became more dollars, and the temporary arrangement became a permanent infrastructure, and somewhere along the way a few coworkers figured it out and stayed quiet, not because they were greedy, but because they knew about Noah and they couldn't bring themselves to be the ones who stopped it. No one in that store was living large. No one had bought a new car or taken an expensive vacation. The money had gone in one direction, straight into keeping a sick child alive. Marcus stood up from the table and walked to the window. He had found his fraud. He had also found something he hadn't been looking for at all. And now he had to figure out what to do with both. Next, before Marcus can act, Noah's condition takes a sudden turn, and Marcus finds himself at the hospital facing a decision he never anticipated. Section 6. A crisis changes everything. Marcus had given himself a deadline. By the end of the week, he would have everything documented, everything verified, and he would sit down with Priya and the company's legal team and handle it the right way. Clean. Professional. The way a 14-year business owner handled a confirmed fraud case, with evidence, with process, with the kind of controlled fairness that protected the company and held the right people accountable. He had a plan. He was good at plans. Then his phone buzzed on Wednesday morning with a message from a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. It was a text from Cody, the young employee from store number 118 who had asked Hannah about the loyalty glitch on day 3. Marcus had quietly given Cody his prepaid number during a break, framing it as a way for staff to flag operational issues directly. He hadn't expected Cody to use it so soon. The message was 4 words long. Hannah's son is hospitalized. Marcus sat down. He typed back, "Which hospital?" Cody replied within seconds. "St. Augustine's. It's bad. Half the store knows already. Some people are going after work." Marcus looked at his laptop. The documentation was open on the screen, transaction logs, audit trails, shift overlaps, everything organized and time-stamped and ready to hand to a lawyer. 11 months of a carefully constructed fraud, laid out with enough clarity that there was no reasonable interpretation other than deliberate and knowing theft from customers. He closed the laptop. He wasn't sure why. He just did. St. Augustine's pediatric ward was on the 4th floor. Marcus arrived at 7 in the evening, after the first wave of store number 118 employees had already come and gone. He had changed out of his undercover uniform and was wearing his own clothes, dark jacket, plain shirt, but he still felt like he was wearing a disguise of a different kind. He didn't belong here as Marcus Bennett, the owner. He wasn't sure he belonged here at all. He found the waiting area outside the pediatric unit and sat in a chair near the window. Hannah was across the room. She was sitting very straight in a plastic chair, both hands wrapped around a paper cup she wasn't drinking from. She was still in her work uniform. She had come straight from a shift. Her name tag was still clipped to her collar. There was a stillness about her that wasn't calm. It was the stillness of someone who had used up every available emotion and was now simply waiting, because waiting was the only thing left to do. 2 employees from store number 118 sat nearby. Marcus recognized them, quiet people who worked the kitchen line, who had always gone carefully silent when loyalty topics came up. They weren't saying much. They were just there, present. The way people show up when showing up is the only useful thing. A doctor came out at 7:40 and spoke to Hannah in a low voice. Marcus watched Hannah's face while the doctor talked. She nodded twice, asked one question, nodded again. The doctor put a hand briefly on her shoulder and went back through the doors. Hannah sat back down and stared at the paper cup. One of the kitchen employees moved closer and said something quiet. Hannah shook her head slightly, not refusing comfort, more like she couldn't process it right now, like the signal wasn't getting through. Marcus stayed where he was. He had not planned to make himself known. He had come, and he was only now admitting this clearly to himself, because he needed to see it. He needed to sit in the same room as the human consequence of everything he had found in those audit logs and feel the full weight of what came next. Because what came next was going to hurt someone. The fraud was real. The customers who had been quietly overcharged deserved to have that acknowledged and corrected. The company's integrity was real. His responsibility to the people who trusted his business was real. None of that had changed, but neither had what he was looking at across this waiting room. A woman in a fast food uniform still wearing her name tag, sitting alone in a hospital at 7:40 in the evening, holding a cup of cold coffee with both hands like it was the only solid thing available to hold. A doctor who had just delivered news that made her nod carefully, because losing composure in a hospital waiting room was a luxury she had decided she couldn't afford. A child on the other side of those doors who didn't know anything about loyalty programs or audit logs or 11% profit margins. Marcus thought about the first day at the window. The woman in the silver hatchback who drove away having paid for a reward she had earned. $3.40. He had felt the wrongness of it sharply and cleanly in that moment. He still felt it. But sitting in this waiting room, the wrongness had company now. It shared space with something more complicated and harder to resolve. Something that didn't fit neatly into a legal framework or a disciplinary procedure. He stayed until 9 o'clock. Then he walked out into the night air and stood on the pavement outside the hospital entrance and understood with absolute clarity that he was no longer just solving a financial problem. He was making a decision about people, and the plan he'd had at the beginning of the week felt very far away. Next, Marcus reveals his identity, and the moment he faces Hannah and her colleagues is nothing like he expected. Section 7. The truth comes out. Marcus gave it 2 more days. Not because he needed more evidence. He had everything. Not because he was stalling, though part of him understood that's what it might look like from the outside. He gave it 2 more days because he wanted to be certain that when he walked into that room and said what he had to say, he was doing it as the right version of himself. Not the version that was angry. Not the version that was shaken by a hospital waiting room. The version that could hold the full weight of what had happened, the fraud and the reason for it, and respond to both honestly. He used the 2 days well. He spoke with the company's legal counsel and laid out the situation without softening it. He spoke with Priya and walked her through the full audit trail. He made a series of decisions about how to proceed that he was prepared to stand behind publicly and privately. And then on Friday morning, he drove to store number 118, not as Mark Benson, the temporary hire, but as Marcus Bennett, owner. He had asked Priya to arrange a brief all-staff meeting before the morning rush. The message sent to the store manager simply said the owner was stopping by for an operational update. Routine language. Nothing that would trigger alarm. He arrived at 7:45. The staff were assembled in the small break room. 12 people on the early shift, crowded between a folding table and a wall-mounted schedule board. Derek was near the back, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral in the way of someone who has decided in advance not to be caught off guard. Hannah was near the door, still in her jacket, not yet fully settled into the shift. She looked like she hadn't slept in several days. She probably hadn't. Marcus stood at the front of the room and took one moment of silence before he spoke. "My name is Marcus Bennett," he said. "I own this company. For the past 2 weeks, I've been working here as a temporary employee under the name Mark Benson." The room went very still. He watched it move across their faces in sequence. Confusion first, then recognition, then the specific kind of dread that comes when you understand that the thing you hoped would never happen is actively happening right now. Derek uncrossed his arms. Hannah went completely motionless. "I came here because the financial data for this location didn't make sense," Marcus continued. Revenue per transaction was consistently higher than comparable locations. Customer satisfaction scores were consistently lower. I needed to understand why, and I knew that sending auditors would change what I was able to see. So I came myself. He paused. "I've spent the past 2 weeks documenting a pattern of loyalty reward fraud. Customers were being charged full price for rewards they had legitimately earned. The difference was being routed into a store account that appeared clean on financial reports. I have transaction logs, shift records, and register data that document this clearly and in detail going back 11 months. The room was completely silent. "Derek," Marcus looked directly at him. "You were the primary point of execution at the register. That's documented. You'll be receiving formal notice today, and I'll be asking you to leave the premises before the shift begins. HR will be in contact about next steps." Derek said nothing. His jaw was tight, but he didn't argue. Maybe he had always known the shape of this day. Then Marcus turned to Hannah. She was looking directly at him. Her eyes were steady in the way that had nothing to do with composure and everything to do with having nothing left to protect. She already knew. From the moment he had said his real name, she had known exactly where this was going. "Hannah," Marcus said, and his voice shifted slightly. Still clear, still even, but without the formal edge he had used with Derek. "I know about Noah." Something moved across her face. The careful steadiness cracked open for just a second. Not dramatically, not with tears, just a small fracture that showed the enormous pressure behind it. "I know about the medical leave. I know about St. Augustine's. I know what the insurance covered and what it didn't. I know that the money from this scheme didn't go into your pocket. It went into keeping your son alive." He held her gaze. "None of that makes the fraud acceptable. The customers who were overcharged were real people who deserved what they paid for. That has to be acknowledged, and it has to be corrected." Hannah nodded. One small, deliberate nod. "I accept responsibility," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "Completely. Whatever the consequences are, I accept them." The room exhaled around her. Marcus looked at the remaining staff, the kitchen employees, the order takers, the young ones who had probably known only pieces of it. Their faces were a mixture of relief and sorrow and the particular exhaustion of people who had been holding a secret so heavy it had bent them sideways for months. For those who knew and said nothing, Marcus said, "I understand why. I'm not standing here pretending the situation was simple. But silence has a cost too, and going forward that needs to be understood." He let that land. Then he said, "We're going to fix this. All of it. And I mean all of it." Nobody in the room was entirely sure what he meant by that yet, but the way he said it made them believe him. Next, Marcus rebuilds, and what he creates changes the company in ways no fraud investigation ever could. Section 8, a different kind of reward. The weeks after were not easy. Marcus had never expected them to be. Real change, the kind that actually holds, doesn't arrive cleanly. It arrives in pieces, with paperwork and difficult conversations, and the slow, uncomfortable work of fixing things that should have been built better in the first place. Derek was let go. The formal process was handled by HR with documentation Marcus had personally reviewed. There was no public announcement, no dramatic exit. Derek collected his things on a Friday morning and left through the same back door Marcus had used on his first day as Mark Benson. Whatever Derek had told himself about what he deserved, the story had ended quietly and without ceremony. 2 other employees who had actively assisted in routing transactions received formal written warnings and were transferred to different locations under close review. Marcus had considered letting them go entirely, but the legal team had noted their limited direct involvement, and he trusted that assessment. The customers came next. Priya's team spent 11 days cross-referencing the transaction logs against loyalty account records. It was painstaking work, isolating the irregular redemptions, matching them to individual accounts, calculating the exact amounts overcharged per customer. Some transactions were too old to trace with confidence. For those, Marcus approved a blanket loyalty credit issued to every active account holder at store number 118 going back 14 months. No explanation beyond a brief message acknowledging a billing error and thanking customers for their patience. It cost the company more than the fraud had generated. Marcus had expected that. He had approved it before the calculation was even finished. What he hadn't expected, what genuinely surprised him, was the response. Several customers replied to the notification message not to claim their credit, but simply to say thank you. One woman wrote 3 sentences about how rare it was for a company to admit a mistake without being forced to. Marcus read it twice and forwarded it to Priya without comment. She knew what it meant. Hannah was a harder problem. Not because Marcus didn't know what the right outcome was, but because getting there required navigating the distance between what the law required, what the company policy required, and what the situation actually deserved. She had committed fraud. That was a fact with no softening available. Customers had been harmed. The company had been used. Her reasons were human and understandable, and they did not change the legal reality of what she had done. She knew that. She had said so in the break room, and she continued saying so through every subsequent conversation with HR and the legal team. She never minimized, never redirected blame toward the insurance system or the medical bills or the impossible position she had been in. She took what was coming with a straightforwardness that Marcus found harder to witness than defiance would have been. She lost her position handling financial transactions. That was non-negotiable, and she didn't argue it. The question of prosecution was more complicated. The legal team had a view, the company's insurers had a different view, and Marcus had his own view, which carried the most weight and which he had formed carefully over several days. He chose not to pursue criminal charges, not because the fraud wasn't serious. It was, but because a prosecution would consume Noah's remaining stable months in court dates and stress and legal fees that Hannah couldn't afford, and because the money had already been accounted for, and because the single most useful thing the situation could produce was not a conviction but a change. So Marcus built the change. The Employee Emergency Assistance Fund was announced company-wide 6 weeks after the store number 118 situation was resolved. It was structured simply. Employees facing genuine hardship could apply for direct financial support, reviewed by a small independent panel that included an HR representative, a frontline employee, and an external advisor. No judgment on how the hardship occurred. No requirement to prove you had exhausted every other option first. Just a clear, accessible lifeline for people caught between a crisis and a paycheck. Marcus funded the initial amount personally. He also brought in 3 local medical advocacy organizations as company partners, groups that specialized in helping working families navigate insurance gaps and access specialist care. Every store location received printed resource guides. Every new employee orientation included a session on what support was available if things went wrong. It wasn't a perfect system. Marcus knew that. There would be gaps and complications and situations it didn't cover. But it was something real in a place where there had been nothing. And in his experience, something real was always worth more than a perfect plan that never got built. He visited St. Augustine's on a Tuesday morning in November. The company had made a donation to the pediatric unit as part of the new community partnership program. A genuine commitment, not a press release. And Marcus delivered it in person, quietly, with no photographer and no announcement. Noah was having a good week. He was 7 years old, gap-toothed, and apparently very interested in whether Marcus had ever operated the deep fryer personally. Marcus told him yes, many times, and that it was less exciting than it sounded. Noah seemed skeptical but willing to accept this information provisionally. Hannah stood nearby, watching her son negotiate with a fast food chain owner about the glamour of industrial kitchen equipment. She looked different than she had in the break room, in the hospital waiting room, in every fraught setting where Marcus had previously seen her. Not fixed, life didn't fix that cleanly, but lighter. The dimmer Renata had described was turned up, just slightly. She caught Marcus's eye. "Thank you," she said quietly. Marcus shook his head once. "Build something better," he said. That's the only thanks I need. He meant the fund, the partnerships, the resource guides, the infrastructure that might catch the next person before they reached the edge Hannah had reached. But he also meant something harder to articulate. Something about the difference between a business that makes money and a business that understands what money is actually for. Something he had known intellectually for 14 years and had only recently understood in his chest. He drove back to headquarters in the late morning light. The numbers at store number 118 would normalize now. The profit margins would settle back in line with every other location. On paper, it would look like a correction. Marcus knew it was something else entirely. It was a company deciding, slowly and imperfectly and at real cost, to be better than the problem that had exposed it. That was the only kind of ending worth building toward. And for the first time in a long time, he drove to work without dread, sitting quietly in the passenger seat beside him. End.